Let's give this beauty of a creation some colors. Well, hello there, I'm Détroit, or you can call me the modern day Frankenstein. Last week we spun a random wheel that gave us a list of body parts to add to a single drawing. Obviously we ended up with something that's not quite right. So if you haven't, do watch last week's video by clicking on the link in the corner there, and then come back to watch this. Because as we designed the creature last week, this week we are painting it, adding colors, shading, all the details. Imagine having some experience with drawing and using it to create this. I love it. Starting with the flats. Adding flat colors to any sketch is always the part of the process I like the least. Because it's a sketch, you can't just select the area you want to fill in, so you have to draw all the edges by hand, which is tedious. And you have to do that with every color. So what I usually do is first flat the whole thing with a single color, a skin tone in this case. Then I use a clipping mask to flat the other colors. This way I have less and less edges to worry about. When I'm done adding all the different colors, I can select the outside of the first flat layer and use that selection to erase every spillage on the other layers. Once that's done, I unclip the layers so that I can make clipping masks on top of each of them. Essentially, what you end up with is a bunch of layers, each locked to their own areas. Well, today I didn't do that. I did everything except unclipping the layers, so I still have only one base flat. It doesn't change anything, and you should definitely do the first option. My reason for not doing this is because near the end, as you will see, I want to soften the edges quite a bit by drawing on top of everything. But I'll get to it later. For shading, I started with the skin tones first, because it's the biggest area of them all. This part of the process was the opposite of fancy. In fact, you can't do much simpler than this. You see, I tried to keep the spirit of the process for last week's video. I did most of the shading on a single layer, even though sometimes I added new layers by force of habit. Forcing yourself to do things on a single layer is a good way to force progress by limitations. Instead of having all the digital tools in the world, you still have to think and act like a traditional painter, by putting paint on top of paint instead of always erasing or redoing. I basically only use the soft round brush at around 40% opacity, and I constantly use the color picker, which is the I key, and the color switch, X key. Pick a color, paint with it, pick another color, paint with it, then alternate and blend the two together. Because we're painting skin, I shaded using a deep red, slightly desaturated, to get warm shadows that will go well with the peachy skin tone. It also contrasts well with the light blue for the clothing and the darker greyish blue for the hair and the metallic part at bottom left. The reddish tone also softens the contrast with the skin and the more dragony parts like the wing and the dragon tail. It ties everything together better. Now that I look at the process footage I recorded after finishing the drawing, I wish I had gone a bit further with the shading, made some parts really dark compared to others. I think this character lacks a strong light instead of the diffused one I used. But I will admit, the best part of this drawing comes from the way it came to be, not the final render. Spinning a body part wheel, it's much funnier than painting the creature realistically afterwards. It was after I was done with the skin shading that I tested a bit with and without the sketch, and that I realized the drawing looked really nice when I put the shaded layer on top of the sketch. So what I did next is duplicate the sketch once per number of flat layers, and for each sketch layer I erased the part outside that flat. Essentially, you get a sketch of, let's say, only the shirt, and another sketch of only the hair, and so on. This way I can paint on top of the sketch for any given area without going over other areas. Man, I'm looking at the big fingernail at the top of the thumb-looking forehead. It's so uncanny. I kinda hate it, but kinda love it at the same time. Anyway, painting on top of the sketch softens everything and makes it slightly more realistic. You have to find the right balance because most of the time removing the sketch entirely leaves everything not defined enough. Especially in parts like crevices and also where you have something in front of something else of similar color tones. Keeping a semblance of line there helps the brain divide the areas better. I would say painting this sort of beautiful monstrosity is definitely a challenge. By painting portraits and characters, you tend to know how shading and lighting works on certain body parts. For example, on a face you tend to accumulate knowledge of how the eye sockets cast shadows and stuff. But when all the body parts are jumbled at random like this, you have to adapt, and this is definitely a challenge. Like, I know how to paint an eye, and I know how to paint an ear. But usually this implies the space between the two, whereas here you have to mix it all up. You have to consciously separate the parts, all the while keeping in mind you're drawing an overall character. In other words, you have the fixed source of light. In my case, a diffuse light in the top right that will cast shadows to the bottom left. But then, if you look at the eye in the middle, for example, this eye on a normal character would be on a face that is slanted back to the top left. So for painting this particular eye, it's as if the light would come from in front bottom of the character. Let me show you a quick diagram to make it more understandable. There. I definitely recommend you try a similar challenge if you can. I do think you should be quite used to painting normal portraits first though. Like, use the knowledge you've accumulated and challenge you in new ways with it. After doing it, you can figure out areas where you need more practice. For example, for me today, I realize I don't really know how to differentiate the large hand from the split calf that is in front of it. So this is an area I need to work on that this challenge brought to life. Challenges are fun, but it's even better if you can get info on what you should work on next at the same time. Activities like drawing are the kind that never end. There is always something new to learn. This is the case for a lot of different things, of course, but let's take sports for example. For any given sport, you can always get better or faster or stronger or more precise, but you are bound by the rules. Take a long distance runner. The only real margin of improvement is on the time it takes to run your marathon. For drawing, as long as you have imagination, you can dig deeper and deeper. Nobody in the world is able to represent every single thing imaginable, and even less able to do so in a realistic style, but also in a cubism style, an abstract style, or a cartoony style, etc. Drawing has such a large margin of improvement, I dare say it's infinite. All the masters will tell you the same thing, that they are not masters because they still have so much more to learn. And then you have people like me who don't even try to get good at one thing, but try to become acceptable at the most things possible. This is why I do challenges of digital painting like that, but I also draw abstract stuff with ink. I draw a landscape, then I design a character, after that I draw a scene or I make a short animation. This is why this YouTube channel is for everybody. I'm not interested in drawing per se, I'm interested in learning it. I don't want to be restricted by the rules of a single type of practice. Like the video if you enjoyed this sort of stuff, and tell me in the comments what should be my next drawing challenge. You can find all my art in the social media on screen or linked in description. Oh, and subscribe, I almost forgot to ask you. I want to reach 2,000 subscribers by the summer, so that is up to you. I'm Detroit and I'll see you next week. Bye!